Last week, I broke down my rest of season rankings tier list. This week, I'm going to be breaking down 5 guys on the rise, 5 guys on the fall from last week's video, since we now have the information from week 10. So we're going to be breaking down a couple guys on the rise, a couple guys on the fall at varying positions. If you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Now let's get into it. All right, so I'm going to talk about the 5 risers and then the 5 fallers in that order. So the first riser, or group of risers here, is the Arizona Cardinals Offense. So that would be Kyler Murray, James Conner, and Marquise Brown most notably. Kyler Murray goes from quarterback 10 to quarterback 8 for me rest of the season. Conner goes from RB33 to RB19, although some of that was injury related. And then Marquise Brown goes from wide receiver 29 to wide receiver 24. This offense is looking up in general. Kyler Murray looked like Kyler Murray this past week. I'm sure you guys all saw the big runs, the big plays, the throws. That is great news for everyone involved, especially for Kyler Murray and Marquise Brown specifically, because their schedule, the Cardinals' rest of season schedule, is top 3 for both quarterbacks and for wide receivers in fantasy points allowed to those positions. Marquise Brown is wide receiver 27 in PPR points per game right now with a 27% target share. With Kyler Murray, he becomes a legitimate wide receiver 2 option. He didn't have a great game this past week, but the targets, the production will come. He was like an inch away from catching a long touchdown. James Conner also is a big-time riser here. He has been RB20 or better in 3 of his 4 healthy games so far this year, and he's only had 1 of those games with Kyler Murray on the field. Now, with Kyler fully back into the fold, he becomes a mid RB2 for me rest of season. If these 3 guys come cheaper than where I currently value them, like I said, Kyler a top 8 quarterback, Conner a top 20 running back, and Marquise a top 24 wide receiver, I suggest going out and sending some offers for any one of these 3 players if you're weak at that position. Number 2 player on the rise for me is Javonte Williams, going from RB16 in last week's video to RB9 in my rankings now. I said it last night on our live stream, but Javonte Williams looks great. He's been a top 10 running back in back-to-back games now in fantasy points, and he has 2 straight performances with over 25 opportunities and 3 straight performances with over 19 opportunities. So there's very few running backs in the NFL that are getting that type of volume, getting that type of workload, and more importantly, can do a lot with it because he can contribute as a receiver. He's explosive. I hope you guys all bought low on Javonte Williams a week or 2 ago when I broke down his case as a big-time buy low, because I think he could really sun run the rest of the season and be a top 10 running back, which is why I have him ranked as such. So number 3 riser on this list is the Steelers backfield. So both Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris are on the rise for me. I had them at 29 and 34 respectively, just on the rise a little bit, 28 and 32. Are they high upside options? Probably not, unless one of them got injured, but both guys are incredibly consistent the past 4 games. If you guys can see it on the screen right now, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren have combined for 7 top 24 PPR finishes over the last 4 weeks, with Najee Harris going 4 for 4 and Jaylen Warren going 3 for 4. So these guys have been really consistent. I feel a lot better about them now than I did earlier on in the year. They're basically like a B-Tech version of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, or like a slightly better version than Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. We know that, Najee's getting about 55% of the work, Warren's getting about 45%, but because Warren's more efficient, he's going to have those spike weeks, going to have those big plays, and Najee is the guy that gets the goal line work and some of the targets there as well. So those 2 guys, reliable flex options going forward, but not anything crazy unless one of those guys were to get injured and be out for a significant period of time. So number 4 riser on my list is 2 guys from my favorite team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Rachaad White and Mike Evans, both going from RB21 to RB18 respectively for Rachaad White, and wide receiver 18 to wide receiver 10 for me rest of the season with Mike Evans. Both of these guys have been on fire recently. Rachaad White is the RB8 on the season in fantasy points per game. We knew that he was dominating this backfield in touches, but the recent spike weeks that we've seen from him, in 4 straight games, he's been a top 12 running back, which is really due in part to 2 things. Number 1, Rachaad White has 24 targets over the last 5 games, 21 targets over the last 4 games. He also leads all running backs in receiving yards over expected. As I talked about a couple weeks ago, I was buying low on Rachaad White because I figured they were eventually going to figure out that they need to use this guy as a receiver and not as a pure up-the-middle grinder. And number 2 reason why Rachaad White has performed well recently is the Bucs' interior offensive line has been been much improved over the last month. We've seen some push up front. We've seen Rachaad White get to the second level a lot more. Very solid RB2 for me rest of the season with legit RB1 upside on any given week, as we've seen. And then with Mike Evans, his teammate, he just dominates all of the high value targets in this Buccaneers offense. And Baker Mayfield, for what people want to say about him, has been a top 15 to 20 quarterback and is more than capable of supporting a guy like Mike Evans. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are a widely debated topic. They have been for a number of years. But the reason that Mike Evans has been so much better than Chris Godwin this year is because even though they're close in target share, 25% for Evans, 22% for Chris Godwin, Evans has a 15 average depth of target to Godwin's 10, and 39% of the end zone targets to Godwin's 23%, 39% of the air yards to Godwin's 25%. He gets all of the high value targets. That's why Mike Evans is more valuable. He gets the deep shots, he gets the end zone looks, he gets the big plays and all that kind of stuff that we want. And if he doesn't drop passes, he probably has an even bigger game this past week. Wide receiver 11 in points per game right now to Godwin's wide receiver 36 on the season. So Mike Evans, a guy that I think you can trust as a weekly wide receiver 1, back-end wide receiver 1 option with the spike week to give you a top 5 performance. And like I said, Baker Mayfield is playing well enough to support Mike Evans having that kind of outlook. The final riser of this video, number 5 on this list, is Dak Prescott. And you could probably loop in like CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks and the rest of the Cowboys passing offense here if you wanted to, Jake Ferguson as well. Quarterback 9 for me before this video, now quarterback 7 in my rest of season rankings. Dak has been outstanding this last month. 4 straight games of top 4 quarterback performances. He has been one of the best fantasy quarterbacks over the last month, and the Cowboys rank 3rd in rest of season strength of schedule for fantasy quarterbacks with potential shootouts during the fantasy playoffs as well. So, I mean, for me, from a best ball standpoint, I'm really excited that Dak is my second highest rostered quarterback. I have a whole lot of CeeDee Lamb as well, because in week 15, they play the Bills, which is a game that me and Danny will actually be at. They play the Dolphins in week 16, and then they play the Lions in the fantasy championship. All 3 of those teams are very capable of putting up points, and we should see the Cowboys put up some points on the other side of the ball as well. So Dak Prescott, a guy that I think you can trust as a rest of season quarterback 1, top 10 type of option. Now let's move into the fallers, and I'm going to stay on the Dallas Cowboys because I'm sure everybody is frustrated with Tony Pollard, myself included as a Tony Pollard manager. He was my RB9 going into this week. He is now my RB20. So I have absolutely reverse jinxed him all the way down the running back rankings. He goes from a locked and loaded top 10 running back to a guy that you can legitimately sit on any given week if you wanted to. There's literally nothing wrong with Tony Pollard's situation. Not many running backs have the offensive line that he has, the offensive play calling and environment that he's in right now. The quarterback who's playing as well as Dak Prescott is playing, the other surrounding pieces like CeeDee Lamb to take away attention. You could drop probably 15 to 20 other running backs in the NFL right now into Tony Pollard's situation, and a lot of them are probably top 6 running backs in fantasy points per game. Pollard has finished outside of RB2 range in 3 straight games and has only been an RB2 or better in half of his 8 games that he's played in 2023. The bottom line is he just needs to play better. That's literally all it comes down to. Tony Pollard is being outplayed by Rico Dowdle. He does not look like the same player. He's inefficient, and this has not been the Tony Pollard we've seen over the past couple of years. Normally, he does most with his touches. He does more than what he's supposed to be doing, yards over expected type of darling, and he has not been that at all. He has 9 inside the 5 carries, and he's converted 2 of them. He has been absolutely brutal this season, and I'm sure you guys really regret drafting Tony Pollard. If you have him, I would probably hold and hope for a big game against Carolina this week, but even still, I'm not excited. If you can get top 15 value for him in a trade, I am willing to move off of him. So number 2 on the fallers list here is George Pickens, wide receiver of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Wide receiver 33 for me in last week's rankings video, wide receiver 37 now in my rankings this week. It's hilarious with George Pickens because just as I was ready to admit defeat and say that I missed on his evaluation, he's now been pretty brutal since I made that statement. And I never thought he would be an elite target share earner, and he really hasn't been. Anytime Deontay Johnson has been on the field in the 4 games that he's played, he has not crossed an 18% target share in any of those games. Whereas when Deontay Johnson was out, we saw games of 33% of the targets, 24% of the targets, 26% of the targets, 35% of the targets. He was a monster for a number of weeks there in the middle of September, early October there. And with George Pickens, this is a guy that I think is now limited to like a wide receiver 3 flex play. He's still talented. He's still going to have that big play upside, the long, contested catches that we've seen from him, but he's simply not getting the targets to be considered a top 24 wide receiver rest of season season like I would have said a couple weeks ago about George Pickens. So he is definitely on the fall in terms of his rest of season outlook. Number 3 on this list in the fallers category is Aaron Jones, running back 16 for me last week, running back 23 for me now. The Packers have not scored more than 20 points since week 2, and this is the biggest issue I have with the entire Packers offense, because Christian Watson, I mean, he's fallen out of favor. All these other guys are no longer what they could have been after, the first 2 games of the season. We thought this offense could have been a real breakout unit. Jordan Love is a mess for at least, it feels like 3 quarters a game. And Aaron Jones appears to either be still hurt or maybe not the same player that he once was. He's 29 and a half years old. He's averaging 3.5 yards per carry on the season, forcing just 7 missed tackles on 63 carries, and he's a bottom 10 graded rusher according to PFF right now. So it appears it's a little bit of both. It's a bad offense, and it's not quite the same uber efficient player that we're used to seeing out of Aaron Jones like we saw last year and years previous. He's getting a fine workload, but that's pretty much it. And if you're getting just a fine workload and you're not in a great offense and you're not an elite player that's going to elevate that, then you're probably nothing more than a back-end RB2, which is where I have Aaron Jones ranked as of right now. David Montgomery is the 4th faller on this list, and I would have talked about him as a big buy low last week. I still think he might be a decent buy low if people are really concerned, but I have him right now as RB14 in my rankings, and I had him as a top 10 to 12 running back last week. This one's a forward projection and a sell high, because with David Montgomery, he's not the RB1 rest of season that he's currently performed as, because he is right now an RB1 in points per game. Jahmyr Gibbs took a large share of the Lions' backfield in week 10, and this was something that I was pretty, pessimistic on. I thought David Montgomery would come back and just get his full workload, and Jahmyr Gibbs would go back to being a 40% snap share player, and maybe it was because David Montgomery was in his first game back, but I do think that Jahmyr Gibbs will probably outsnap him going forward based on what we've seen. Fantasy managers would probably be wise to sell high on David Montgomery because, like I said, he's 17.5 PPR points per game right now. He's performed as an RB1, and you should be able to get RB1 production and other pieces in a trade for him. And he also scored a 75-yard touchdown this past week, which doesn't hurt his case either. But the usage is something that I'm really concerned about. So if you can sell high on Montgomery based on that usage, then definitely go ahead and do that. The final faller of this video, and then we'll close things out here, is Adam Thielen, who was wide receiver 19 for me just 2 weeks ago, wide receiver 26 for me now in my rankings. And I could honestly debate moving him even a little bit lower than this, but I do want to respect what he's done so far. Adam Thielen is still a really good option. He's wide receiver 10 on the season, for God's sake. So he has been really solid, but these are rest of season rankings, right? These are what I view this guy as the rest of the season, not how good has he been so far. The Panthers are the 29th scoring offense in the NFL. Bryce Young looks like he's struggling. Thielen is older, and his play has tapered off recently, and even though I still like him as a guy that you can throw into your wide receiver 3 spot, throw into your flex spot, no problem, I think you'd be wise to try and sell him off right now on the back of the fact that he's wide receiver 10 on the season. Try and sell him for an underperforming Jalen Waddle, for an injured T. Higgins, for Devontae Smith. Maybe you even have to go down a little bit lower than that and go to a Michael Pittman Jr. or a Christian Kirk or a Marquise Brown or a DJ Moore with Justin Fields coming back. I would be willing to sell him straight up for any of the names I just mentioned, and you might even be able to use him in a 2-for-1 package deal. Maybe you have Adam Thielen and David Montgomery, and you can go after, let's say, Travis Etienne or somebody that's a real difference maker for your fantasy roster. We appreciate the brief window that wide receiver 1 Adam Thielen was, but I do think he's more so a wide receiver 2-3 type rest of season. Knowing that he's the top receiver for an offense that's scoring barely over 15 points, I think it's unreliable to expect him to put up, 15, 20 points per game unless he's just going to completely dominate the offense, which is possible, but I don't think it's going to come to that level. And we've seen him now be mortal the last couple weeks and really underperform, and it probably wasn't very fun having him in your lineup. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you got some value from it, leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Big time Dynasty rankings update for the trade value charts for one quarterback, Superflex, tight end premium. If you guys are in Dynasty leagues, in a lot of Dynasty leagues, and you want to know, who's the best buy lows, you want to know what you should trade player X for, what you should go out and offer for player Y, that will be all covered for you in the Dynasty Rankings Manifesto. That has been updated this past week after the Week 10 games, and also our 2024 prospect rankings are in there, our top 50s with measurables, with heights, weights, classes, age on draft night, all that good stuff. The Dynasty Rankings Manifesto was packed with everything you need for Dynasty leagues, so definitely be sure to check that out. out if you guys are interested. That will be linked down below in the pinned comment. Also, be sure to check out our sponsors over at Underdog Fantasy. A lot of cool games going on over there. Pick'ems for those island games are especially fun, and also playoff best ball will be coming up very soon as well. So definitely check that out if you guys are interested as well. Promo code FSE will get you 100% match back on whatever you deposit. So definitely check that out. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.